So this lesson is all about water balance and maintaining homeostasis in our bodies in terms of the amount of water that's in our blood and surrounding our cells. So why is that important? Well, humans can't survive for more than just a few days without water. We can survive for a lot longer without food than we can without water, and yet we're losing water all the time. So a human adult loses about 2 liters of water a day through urine, sweat, and just exhaling. And our body has a few mechanisms in place to make sure that we don't get too dehydrated. Like a 1% drop in our body mass worth of water is going to cause us to be pretty thirsty and go and fix that situation. A 5% drop is going to cause extreme pain in our collapse, and 10% drop in our water is going to cause our death. And the body's internal environment of extracellular fluid, the fluid that surrounds the cells and tissues, and the plasma portion of our blood has to remain at a constant volume, solute content, and temperature. So how do we do that? Well, we probably recognize these three pictures from earlier science classes. We've got isotonic, hypotonic, and hypertonic situations. So similar in this unit, we're going to talk about hyperosmotic, hypoosmotic, and isoosmotic solutions. So a hyperosmotic solution is going to be a solution where on one side of a membrane there's a high solute concentration and a low water concentration. A hypoosmotic solution is one where we have a high water concentration and a low solute concentration. And an isoosmotic solution is going to have the same concentration of solute and water on both sides of a membrane, which is considered the ideal condition because we're not losing any water or gaining too much water into our cells themselves. Now, why is that an issue? So from previous science classes, we talked in terms of isotonic, hypotonic, and hypertonic. In an isotonic solution, which is isoosmotic, similar to this slide, in an isoosmotic solution, we have just as much solute, so say dissolved salts or dissolved glucose outside the cell as we do inside the cell. So what happens is water is going to leave and enter the cell, but just as much water is leaving as there is entering. And so as a result, the cell doesn't increase in volume and it doesn't decrease in volume. If we have a hypoosmotic situation, then it means that we have a larger concentration of dissolved solutes inside the cell, and water is going to be rushing into the cell, causing it to inflate up and lose its shape. Even worse is a hyperosmotic situation, where we have higher concentration of dissolved solutes outside the cell. So in that case, the cells are going to be losing water. And this is a situation where we would be dehydrated, and so water is leaving our cells into our blood, for example. So this is the one that this lesson is going to focus on and how we avoid it. So osmosis is a crucial process in regulating our homeostasis. Osmosis is the movement of water across membranes. When we actively regulate our osmotic pressure in our bodily fluids, we call it osmoregulation. All organisms need to keep their intracellular and extracellular fluids isoosmotic, where we have an equal concentration of solutes outside the cell as we do inside the cell. Some species of marine animals do not need to regulate their extracellular fluid as water flows freely through them, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So to maintain homeostasis, cells need to regulate their ionic balance, their pH, and their osmotic concentration. Animals can maintain this balance through the process of excretion. Excretion is the elimination of waste products and foreign matters from the body, and in humans we use our excretory system. Okay, so what builds up in our extracellular fluid that needs to be excreted as waste? Well, when we digest proteins, we break them down into amino acids, and then those amino acids can be used as cellular fuels, or we can use those amino acids to build up our own proteins. But at the same time, when we digest proteins into amino acids, they release NH2 groups, which are amino groups. Now those really quickly in the body get converted into a chemical called ammonia, which is the same chemical that is found in Windex. Now, ammonia is really toxic to the human body, so we have to really quickly deal with that. Other species like fish don't really have a problem with ammonia because ammonia dissolves in water. So fish actually just dissolve that ammonia into the water that's flowing through their gills constantly, and they get rid of it that way. Now for mammals, we have to take that ammonia and convert it into a molecule called urea. So urea is a chemical that we secrete through our urine, and it's how we get rid of the amino groups that build up from our digesting of proteins. Other species create a molecule called uric acid, and that happens in reptiles, birds, and insects. So when proteins are metabolized, the amino group must be removed and discarded by the body. That's called deamination. The byproduct of deamination is ammonia, which is extremely toxic to the body. The liver takes one molecule of ammonia and adds it to a bicarbonate ion to make urea, which is water soluble, and that gets eliminated in our urine. Urea is 100,000 times less toxic than ammonia, so this process happens really quickly. For a side note here, ammonia, which is a water-soluble gas, is really toxic, and 0.005 milligrams can kill a human. Fish pass the ammonia out through their gills, and land animals can't do that, so they have to store ammonia and find ways to get rid of it. For us, we store it in the form of urea, which is then accumulated by our kidneys into our bladder, and then we urinate it out. Okay, so our urine output is directly linked to the amount of water that we take in. If we increase our water intake, we increase our urine output. And if we decrease our water intake, or if we increase our exercise, we have a decreased urine output as our body uses the water. So ADH, one of the first hormones that we're going to study in depth, is antidiuretic hormone. It causes the kidneys to increase water reabsorption and reduce our water loss. It's produced by the hypothalamus and released by the pituitary gland. And ADH controls reabsorption of the last 15% of water that passes through the nephron in the loop of Henle and the distal tubule. Now this here is for your study later, because in a couple of lessons we're going to be talking about the kidney in depth, and this will make more sense when we come back to study this information later. Okay, so this last slide is a little bit complicated to understand until we talk more about the kidney. So I've got a quick picture here of a nephron, which is an important structure in the kidney that we're going to talk more about when we do the anatomy of the kidney. But basically, here in red I've got blood coming into the nephron, and then here in blue we've got blood leaving the nephron. Now the nephron is all of these yellow tubules, and basically the fluid in our blood is going to get secreted into these yellow tubules, and it's going to go through a structure called the loop of Henle. And as it's going through the loop of Henle, it passes through a bunch of capillaries, and that's the body's opportunity to reabsorb water before it makes its way over to a collecting duct and gets urinated out. So this antidiuretic hormone really affects the permeability of this loop of Henle and how much water it's able to reabsorb. So here's the slide. It says the descending loop of Henle is permeable to water and ions, but the ascending tubule is only permeable to salt. So typically, the descending tubule, that's this one here that's heading down, is permeable to water and ions, but the ascending is only permeable to salt. Now, without antidiuretic hormone, the rest of the tubule remains impermeable to water. But with antidiuretic hormone, the upper part of the distal tubule, which is this upper part of the distal tubule, and the collecting duct, which is this, which is heading down to our bladder, become permeable to water. So what happens is, with antidiuretic hormone, as the liquid is making its way to our bladder, here in the distal tubule and here in the collecting duct, there's one more opportunity to absorb water. And so the body absorbs more water, the urine becomes more concentrated, and we conserve more water in our body and prevent being dehydrated.